welcome each and every one of you to the meeting. We are really glad to have all of you here in present. 90% of African organizations are operating below the cybersecurity poverty line. Over 90% of parents don't understand what measures to take to protect their children against cyberbullying. They actually don't know, should we report to the police? Should we go to report to Facebook? The cost of cybercrime across Africa is 3.5 billion. This number, again, means the amount of money organizations, be it in government, private sector, are spending as a result of cybersecurity initiative. Unfortunately, cyber risk has moved away from being a technology problem to really, it requires somebody who understands risk. And therefore, we need to move away from tool-oriented specialists to individuals that understand the workflow of these different organizations. Fake news also became an issue, and then 96% of cybersecurity incidents either go unreported or unresolved. In terms of number of professionals on the continent, we're still struggling. When you think about organizations that allow bring your own devices, the number is increasing across the board, apart from telcos. In terms of areas that rank in terms of sector ranking, banking still is number 1, government was number 2, financial services, mobile money, hospitality and retail. This year we'll see SACCOs move into number 2. Now, top trends again as at early last year is fake news, insider threat, ransomware, cyber pyramid schemes, and phishing. This year we're seeing business email compromise went all the way up. It's probably the second most dangerous attack, I would say. I think we lost as a country to these people almost 300 million. The other aspect also, last 2 weeks ago, we had a major attack against an institution. And what shocked us the most was this money was taken out from 3 different countries, from Nigeria, from Ouagadougou, and from Russia. The concern there is, if this thing is handled or managed within the Kenyan jurisdiction, it's easier to investigate. But if the insider is working from Kenya and you see a transaction where the money is exfiltrated from Ouagadougou, all of a sudden now, you're now dealing with a multinational issue. Going back to the mutual legal agreement issue, cyber criminals have figured out they can get into your database. And once they get into your database, you cannot investigate it. You cannot be able to pull any logs from it. Pretty much, you are exposed. We're now seeing cases where for some of these institutions, some of the criminals are now hiring cleaners to go deploy a device on the networks, on the switches. So that becomes another area that we need to look at. In general, when you think about trends and why and how, it goes back to the issue of access to internet. It goes back to social networking. It goes back to mobile computing, cloud computing, and automation, globalization, and a growing young population. If we don't address these issues, we'll still continue dealing with the same problems. Now, at the core of the cybersecurity problem is really 3 things. Number 1 is deterrence. When you talk about deterrence, is we need to stop these guys. But how do you stop someone if you cannot attribute to them? Number 1, understand what happened. And understanding doesn't mean saying we lost money. Understanding means look at your logs, how did it happen? Number 2, you have to attribute who is this person that is leading to this. And then the very last one is deterrence. What policies or what tools do we put in place to be able to address this issue? When you look at the issue of understanding, there's network monitoring, there's detective controls, there's preventive controls, there's risk program visibility. We are all struggling here. When we look at the issue of cyber attribution, we need forensics, you need collaborations, you need standards. And the challenge with attribution is, if you are compromised and I'm compromised by the same individual, if we don't talk to each other and know what happened on your side and how we compare, then you still have a challenge. In terms of deterrence, the 3 areas I've mentioned, they are very technical areas because you only prosecute with evidence. You cannot prosecute because you're second guessing. It's easier to prosecute M-Pesa transaction fraud because the money moved into a certain account and Safaricom has that information. Now, just a way forward in conclusion, we do have a challenge on skills gaps. We do have a challenge on skill gaps. And it's not even a question of how many people do we need. We just have the wrong people addressing this problem. The next one is also on visibility. How can you launch a process that automates an ATM process or POS to work 24/7, meanwhile you leave work at 5 o'clock on Friday and come back on Monday? Previously, the manual process, somebody had to look at the transaction, look at the check, approve it, look at your face, confirm who you are. We can take maybe 3 questions for William. You've given us the problems. What are the solutions? I think in terms of solutions, number 1, we have to build skills, we have to move into research, we have to build collaboration. This year alone, we've had 15 cyber attacks against different financial institutions, a total exposure of 700 million shillings, amount lost 350. If these organizations had talked to each other, we would not have lost that money, because it was exactly the same MO that was used.
What are cybersecurity priorities for 2019?
Priority, we still have to go back into malware research. We have to train our people to identify malware. Monitoring is also very critical in terms of what you're looking at. And then most important is collaboration.
You are saying there's a skills gap and universities are churning graduates every now and then. What's the problem?
To be honest with you, cybersecurity belongs to our universities. They need to sit down. We need a research fund from the ICT ministry to consistently fund 5 to 10 students to study malware, to study how people are being attacked in this market.
For us, a key priority as an internet society is IoT and IoT security. Maybe I missed part of it, but would you maybe speak to that?
Should we be worried about IoT at this time? Between you and I, probably not. Because even our own IT networks are highly vulnerable.
I think one of the greatest problems we have is understanding who is an expert. So I would have loved to know what then would entail an expert.
Cybersecurity is a research-driven career, because you can't read a book about addressing a malware that has been modified.
How you get to the quantification of the figures that you report in your reports?
We have 2 different sources of information. One, we go directly to organizations and we find out what their budget was for last year. We understand what it used that budget for. And using that information, now we're able to come up with an estimate that we're able to run and share.
Cybersecurity. So a lot has been said about cybersecurity, I guess, in the past. A lot has also been said this morning. So in terms of the state of play, so cybersecurity, I guess, is one of those things which we can call an emerging issue. It has been an emerging issue for a while. These cybersecurities, because of the nature of the world we operate in, they are coming from other countries. You might hear an attack came from Russia, might come even from another African country. So how prepared are we for the world in which we live, or in which we are moving to? So I think it's very timely to have a discussion about cybersecurity at this point, and to just take stock of where are we and where do we want to go.
The Ethiopian herdsman who's sitting across the border or herding his cattle across the border in Moyale does not recognize the legitimacy of Kenyan law, and he has no right to, because he didn't have an opportunity to have a say over those who are appointed over him. In any case, they are not appointed over him because he lives in a different jurisdiction. If you look at cyberspace as being that place that exists outside the jurisdiction of traditionally understood national laws, then the question is how far should it apply? And there have been debates from the time cyberspace became currency, became vogue, as to whether or not national legislation can actually apply in cyberspace. So if then the theory is that it is appropriate, it is possible, it is appropriate, it is recommended to make laws for cyberspace, then the question is how far, how practically should that law apply when you're trying to prosecute a crime?
We need to move as a region to create policies and laws that look at cybersecurity from a risk perspective. Risks evolve every day, and each day, since innovation is moving faster than the laws being created, then we need really to bring the people who create the laws closer to the people who innovate. Like IoT, everything is connected at the level of the component. You find the CCTV cameras, if you buy them from China, there's a common component inside there that sends back information to China. That means that you don't know what you are losing in terms of privacy of your data back to whoever sold you.
As we give technology to very young people, are we aware that we're also ceding the rights of giving them principles and values which are consistent with our way of life to others, because they're now exposed to a much wider audience? in Kenya, nearly all of us have some form of this technology in our hands. This awareness can no longer, or capacity can no longer be confined to the few. At the same time, we must not put a bigger burden on ordinary members of the public than they are able to bear. And this is true even in the area of physical security.
I think we have some time, about 10 minutes or so, to do some questions to the panelists.
We see now with the NTSA releasing an app, a new app, a mobile app, and part of what the app requests to access on your phone is like your camera, your location, your microphone, your phone, your storage, and then other apps. And what's even more worrying about it is that it gives you an opt-out option, not an opt-in option. So we know that government goes for third-party service providers to provide these services, but I think that's a blurriness that's not supposed to be encouraged when it comes to government practices.
Thursday we call matatus that are speeding because somebody has taken a photograph and posted through the app. That is why the app asks for the camera access, and that's why it asks for the microphone.
There's this issue of sending wrong transactions to a wrong number, or like we were saying, social engineering, and then you realize something has been done and you call Safaricom. This has been going on for long, and I'm wondering, like in terms of statistics, do you produce a report of how many cases have been reported to you? And if so, are there actions that you have taken?
We do what we can do, but you also need to appreciate as a private citizen that we are not the ones responsible for ensuring that a crime is prosecuted, investigated, etc. What we do is we assist. Really, law enforcement agencies are the ones who are charged with that mandate. And unfortunately, based on the nature of such crimes, they don't tend to get as much priority. Because I mean, if you're investigating a murder, a kidnapping, a terrorist attack, versus someone who has lost 20,000 on M-Pesa, you can see how in the scheme of things they get treated. So I think the better approach should be, as opposed to waiting for it to happen, let's get as many people as possible to understand, yes, and to be aware of the issues around how social engineering works, so that then we are able to prevent that person from becoming a victim.
Do you think it is time that we also added a specialized course for cybercrime, like a cybersecurity division within the judiciary? Would that add value?
Absolutely. But it's a question of budget, ultimately boils down to that. Once you have budget, then you can do training, you can recruit specifically, etc.
It appeared impossible really to prosecute a crime that is in the cyberspace. So is there a possibility, or is there a time when there is a sense of universal jurisdiction, such that there are crimes that, regardless of where it is perpetrated or it originates, jurisdiction applies?
I've been told by a Congolese researcher that in Africa we did not have boundaries, we had corridors. Yeah? So you could move from place to place, and as long as you kept to the corridor was movable. Yeah, it meant what distance you kept from the other communities as you moved. You could move your animals and everything. And I believe that this type of African wisdom is what is needed for the internet age. But since you despise your wisdom and you just adopt foreign principles such as national boundaries, I'm not surprised that you're having problems. But now I'm not speaking as governments. I'm speaking as Catherine Guitar.
Whose property is being protected and who is it being protected against? Does data, or for instance biometric data, belong to the citizen or does it belong to the government?
Normally, a best practice should be that we should agree as a society which data is the purview of government and which data is my personal data. Something as personal as your name, it's yours, but usually you don't call yourself. Yeah. So it's a piece of data which other people use to identify you and to differentiate you. I'm not a lawyer, but I'm sure you can define what a name is. So is your name personal property, or is it something that should be held by the government and protected by the government, and then other people can access it as needed in order maybe to identify you?
If we are to protect ourselves from government and government overreach, then we have made a decision about who the data belongs to.
Yes, the government can keep a minimal set of information about you, and then keep the infrastructure in place that in other places maybe your data does not have to persist there. You can just be identified and perhaps a certificate sent to prove that you are properly identified and there's no need for that data to be held. However, you have to put the systems in place. One, you have to identify what that data is that is shared across the board, and then you have to have the single source of truth, which is then properly protected and which can then be shared by all actors.
I'd like us to move to the group session. We look at the political issues, the environmental, economic issues, social issues, technological, and legal. So what the task is for every group to pick one priority out of the 6.
From a political perspective, what we saw is first of all, there's a power differential in favor when setting policies, and this is in favor of those with resources, and this ends up in a situation where you have those with resources influencing policies, projects, budgets, and priorities. In terms of solutions, we saw that we need affirmative action to drive inclusivity. Stakeholders' voices should not depend on the power of the wallet or the resources that you have.
We're tackling legal and policy issues, and one of them that we've come up with is we need to understand what the community standards are in cyberspace so that laws are legislated accordingly. Thank you.
More similar to what the political side had, which was with respect to the divide between those who can afford and those who cannot, and just solutions regards to affirmative action and empowerment of the public.
We're dealing with environmental, so the problem is insufficient protection of industrial system controls, especially in industries where there's an uptake of technology, for example in water treatment plants and chemical processes. So the solution is that the companies that have such systems to at least have an alert system to enable them to identify intrusion attempts and any changes made to their network.
We were handling the social problem, and we were agreeing with what Dr. Gitao was saying on the gap in the value systems transmitted to the youth in their use of digital technology. So we are saying there is a gap in the value systems we have, and so our solution is that we should introduce media literacy programs where actually the youth are taught on the value systems that they should actually adopt when they are online.
The legal issue, lack of proper training of legal practitioners in matters cyberspace. Solution, of course, is offering collaborative training between the cybersecurity experts, or the cyber experts, and the legal needs.
On the economic, so there's also a lack of coordination between the private and the public sector. Budget is a key challenge, and even from a security perspective, monitoring of some of the foreign institutions who've set office in Kenya is lacking, because some of them could actually be doing that to carry out cybercrime. So we need to have coordination between the private and the public sector, and even the different public institutions monitor various foreign companies and increase budgets.
Technological, we had issues to do with the lack of skills literacy for civilians, and also we don't have clear guidelines on who are the experts who can advise us and train. Then in terms of equipment, the challenge here is that all equipment that we receive in the country do not go through certain certifications in terms of security. So the solutions that we've proposed here is that we need to regulate our experts, have them certified so that they can give authority on this area. Then in terms of equipment, maybe borrowing from how KBS, Kenya Bureau of Standards works, all our equipment are taken through a compliance structure.
On technology, there is the fast evolution of computing trends and the increasing need for computing power, and then the laws around cloud storage and sharing of resources and data protection, critical infrastructure. So there's a lot of legal gaps there, and then there's also sort of like the equilibrium between legislature and executive, which comes to also political issues that point to different interests being represented by different aspects, arms of government.
Let's give each of the groups a round of applause.
Many years ago in Nigeria, if you were invited by DCI, it's called DSS in Nigeria, if you were invited by DSS in Nigeria, people began to literally plan your burial. I'm serious, because you would never be found again. It was so bad that in 1995, when a young man bought a license from government to start what is called an internet service provider, of course everybody was excited. Oh wow, we're going to get internet beyond just Shell and a few other companies in Nigeria. And what killed it was this whisper to General Sani Abacha that the internet it moves faster than newspapers. It was easier to control newspapers. If you printed it at 3 a.m., they sent the military to you to pick up all the copies. If they were nice, they bought all the copies. If your comment was too strong, they seized all the copies. So if your copies were bought, you won't mind, but at times they seized the copies, and they told him the internet would make information go quickly. That even if you buy all the newspapers, everyone will hear about it. And you know what it did? Basically threw someone into jail. But in 2013, the government made it was a simple typographical error. Someone forgot to remove a phrase from what was the national budget. Civil society groups went to court. And unfortunately, that became, it was an either-or conversation. It was either security or privacy. And we had a very interesting conversation with some members of the National Assembly. And this was funny, because we produced a policy brief to explain why you could actually have security and privacy and respect rights. So, what did we do? Multi-stakeholder action was naturally the next thing to do. One of the first things we did was to start training. And one of the things we learned from the training was that it becomes much easier when you have conversations and people begin to see the other side. Even if all you do is to have the conversation, trust me, many times, and I see this happen, even in many of these meetings in different countries where people pretend to disagree with you, but when they leave the room, the next conversation they're going to have with their colleagues, they're going to quote the things you said to sound smart. My last point here is basically one of the things that I've said to myself, if this is all I do for the next 5 years, then my salary is worth it. Some of the biggest lessons that we've learned, when you get into a room as a young man and you've seen a lady in the corner, the power goes off and the room is dark and you're winking in the dark. Now, everybody knows if you're winking in the dark, you're wasting your time. She can't see you guys. But that's exactly what we do every time we sit in our silos and have conversations. That's all. When we sit as bloggers and say we don't want what the government is doing, you're winking in the dark if you don't engage the government. A few lessons before I get the note that says shut up in a polite way. Number one is that when you work with people who are both hardworking and knowledgeable, but are blinded by their biases, there is no way that you can have a winner when you continue to, because all you do is argue, not have conversations. Engagement, by the way, doesn't mean agreeing at all times. There will be times when we will disagree. But finally, it's the fact that when we say there's a problem, there's a security problem, there's a cybersecurity problem, we're trying to solve it. What is most sensible is that while solving that problem, we don't create another problem, which is what happens many times. So many of the countries that we work, we find out that the government says to address cybersecurity or hate speech or fake news in some cases, we need this new law. And then the law is created and the law sends journalists to jail. Thank you.
We're now going to get into panel.
Noted from the conversations that we're having here that there are gaps that the public and our stakeholders, the people in this room are our stakeholders, are not familiar with some of the functions and some of the roles that we do.
From a technical perspective, we want to have that engagement with everyone on the table, meaning that what the technical guys are doing, they also need to get involved with the policymakers. We also need to have engagement with the private sector as well as the public sector in the sense of, one, assisting in the policy making, but also more importantly, once these policies have been adopted, who's the person who's going to implement them? What the private sector is doing, or what they are trying to work around, and what the government is working, there seems to be at some point some disconnect. And when there is that disconnect, we are not able to move forward.
The multi-stakeholder approach of engagement is very important because we all play a role towards ensuring that we have policies in place and management of the same. Most importantly for us is painting the context for government. So for Industry 4.0, we've already done studies now, trying to get our statistics in place to show government this is where we are and this is what the context is.
It's important that we get into this multi-stakeholder thing, knowing that there is no one way that is standard. We have identified 3 main processes that are used for multi-stakeholder engagement. So you can have one that is you deliberate and you make decisions. You can also deliberate and it can just be consultative, which means you don't finalize on any decision. Then you can have multi-stakeholder engagement that is just discussions, and therefore you just discuss and share knowledge. And I think what based on the 3 and based on my interactions with government in Kenya, under our new constitution that requires multi-stakeholder engagement, I have seen us move through the different 3 forms of stakeholder engagement. And sometimes we are consulted, but there is no decision made regarding the input we have given, but we have shared the knowledge. The other times where we are actually in the discussion, we are consulted, and we even come to a decision on how we shall then move forward. And other times we just end up having discussions, talk shows, so to say, but they are not really talk shows because I think at the end of the day, that is where the multi-stakeholder process builds trust and makes everybody comfortable.
Is multi-stakeholder engagement equal to public consultation or public participation?
The public participation and public engagement can be multi-stakeholder, but they don't have to be. Multi-stakeholder comes in when you're able to bring on board entities with different interests. The underlying word is different entities, different interests, then that makes it multi-stakeholder.
But one of the strategies that we use in terms of the multi-stakeholder approach and strategy has come is that we always do our value chain analysis. Before we go to government, we have checked who's along our value chain, who's going to be affected by the decisions that we make and the implications of the decisions that we do.
Why does it seem to be a challenge to adopt, especially at certain, parts of the economy, be it government, be it,
One of the biggest challenges that sometimes gets very frustrating is the fact that multi-stakeholder engagement requires time and patience.
When you talk about us, what's our identity within the cyberspace? Is it us meaning the national government? Is it us meaning KMA? Or is it us, okay? KA?
We try to link it to livelihoods. So how does this affect livelihoods? So that our decisions are not just private sector led, which are economical interests that come before us. So we try to push ourselves. Who are we speaking to? At the end of the day, what will that normal mwananchi, what will be the impact to the normal citizen down there?
My panelists, closing remarks, priorities for 2019.
2019 priorities is to enhance our information sharing for the national case at CE and capacity building, and those to go hand in hand.
We're involved in investigating incidences, and we realize that most organizations have a technical skill gap in terms of cybersecurity. And this comes back also to the area of our training. In short, in our institutions, are we churning out skilled cybersecurity hands-on skill to the students who are coming out to the public? That is very of importance.
For government recommendations today and for government, they need to be flexible enough to review the policies that are in place, the strategies that are in place, the laws that are in place to fit the context of the sector actors who are already now seeing the implementation gaps and seeing the opportunities that are there. And finally, of course, we as industry are working towards ensuring that we are building capacities within the industries to be able to supply this equipment, supply this good that is needed in the ICT industries, and as well transform themselves to embrace the new transformation with technology.
As we move towards multi-stakeholder engagement in cybersecurity, we also need to be innovative in our approaches. We should not shy away from trying out new things and trying out new approaches, because it is what works for us.
Thank you very much, guys. Let's please give a round of applause to my panelists. Next steps, recommendations, next steps, and sustainability.
We need to put all those things that were discussed. And then we have to allocate time frames to priorities to those issues. And now we're going to be guided by the blueprint.
Is that first of all, there's a very, very wide variety of stakeholders in here. So I think one of the things we should do is sort of like map out the different stakeholders, where they are, probably just have a ranking of where they are in terms of capacity or readiness to adopt different interventions.
I think we need to set targets. When next will the stakeholders be coming together? I know it happens all the time, but when is the next one? For example, Fiona announced a meeting. Is that the next one? If it is, what do we want to have achieved by then?
A policy framework on how to do this, and the focus is in 4 key areas. So those frameworks are already there. Let's adapt them and nationalize them. We can tweak them to fit what is unique to us.
The patience to be able to walk this journey out, and the fatigue of being able to carry everyone on board, and those you lose by the wayside to pull their hand and down, because it's a marathon. It's not a sprint.
These things, they are very good, and I would really want to see the end result. But you'll find that next meeting that is called, you get another new panel. Even if you invite people from ODPP or from judiciary, you'll find another representative, and then you go back to the drawing board. You get my point? So the consistency is also important in seeing the results of this.
Even if you came here representing your respective organization, next time you might even get a promotion or get a better job and go somewhere else. That does not mean this conversation ends. So we have a way of curating this information. That is why actually the end result of this meeting is a KICTANet policy brief on cybersecurity, including multi-stakeholders. And this information can now be used by all the actors within this space.
Do we have a political representation or political will? So that whatever we propose here, there is a political will to push it forward.
Political will. Good question. We do have a working relationship with
different arms of the government, ICT bodies. But once in a while, we collide. For example, the cybersecurity bill, when it was a bill, the committee for Honorable Kisang called us to a meeting. So 3 hours on a Monday morning, we went through clause by clause, and we told them we are opposed to this, we think this is what you should do. They agreed, actually, like the clause on child pornography, they took our suggestions wholly, including the text. We disagreed on fake news, but they told us to give options just according to why they disagreed. The issue of cybersecurity, it's really a responsibility of everyone. So we can't just leave it to the government alone, and I know you're from the government, but we can't leave it to you alone because of the challenges that have been articulated today.
And I think as an institute that is responsible for doing that for the judiciary, we'll be very keen to see what discourse goes on here and how we can partner with you to try and reach out to our members and those who serve with us. And also along with that, other government agencies that deal with matters legal and how we can best ensure that there is cyber justice, if there is such a cyberspace justice, if there is such a word. Maybe I just made it up.